live stream service.
Yep, we're live.
Good evening, everyone. This is Cleo Monago here, preparing for our dialogue this evening. I'm doing some technical stuff here for a moment, so I won't be interrupted. Okay, there it is. And we have a special show lined up for you. The theme, if you haven't read already, is Black Womanhood, Resisting Envy, Conflict, and Murder. For the thousands of you who were with us 2 weeks ago, the theme was Black Manhood, Resisting Envy, Conflict, and Murder, featuring Dr. Tommy Curry. It was and still is a very powerful conversation. People still spreading it around. Several thousand people have viewed it, and we're still getting feedback on it. I imagine that this conversation was going to do the same. From my perspective, I don't see enough dialogues between Black men and women about issues relevant to us, each other, or how we view each other, or what our concerns are. And this conversation will focus on women, but clearly it will be between Black men and women. And I'll introduce the Black men first, only because they're members of the Black Men's Exchange, and we're part of a team here. And I'll mention that we have Duke Porter, or Duke the Root Porter, up there looking like he's finna fly in the sky. You want to say something to us real quick, Duke?
I'm a poet. I do poetry things.
Okay. He's a brilliant, nationally known, award-winning poet. He's trying to be shy for once, which is unusual for Duke. Anyway, we have Kashama Sankofa also here. What's up, Kashama?
Hey, how y'all doing? Peace, family.
And he's down there near Trayvon Martin land in Florida. On purpose, he's down there in the state.
Yeah, I made a choice to come down here.
Yeah, he made a choice, bless his heart. And we love him. And we also have 3 sisters here, and I'm going to introduce them. And I'm going to say a little bit about what I know, and you can give further details about yourself if you want to be more fully known than what I'm going to come up with, all right? We have, to start, the sister in the middle with the, I don't think, is that pink? What color is that back there, Ellen?
It's actually orange.
Okay, orange. Okay, if you got a good computer, it's orange. Anyway, that's Ellen G. She's a co-organizer of Baltimore Ceasefire 365. We also have Lisa Davis with the very powerful symbol behind her, which she will explain in some moment. And she's with the People's Organization for Progress. And we have Inshira Saran, who is an activist, artist, and entrepreneur, and one of our young people. We have several young people here, but she's the youngest, I think. And here we are to talk about Black womanhood, resisting envy, conflict, and murder. Did I miss anything that you want the audience to know, sisters, about you?
I strongly identify as a creative. I'm an artist. I make my art that is of service to myself. And of course, it's important for me that my art is reflective of what's going on. I think you still could call me an activist. That's just not the title I like to give myself and my part in the movement.
Sure. And I forgot, because his face isn't here, but there's a name down there that says Anthony. His name is Nathaniel. He will be speaking at some point. He's a handsome young brother, so we don't know why he won't show y'all his face.
Tell him, child.
But anyway, he's here. Last I looked, he was eating watermelon. I hope he's finished by now. But he might be joining us verbally at some point when he has something to interject into the discussion. So sisters, we're talking about womanhood, resisting envy, conflict, and murder. And we intend this conversation to be honest and frank, and for people to raise real issues, including if there are issues with men, with each other. Whatever's going on, we want this conversation to be real and illuminating for our listening audience. So when Ellen sits down somewhere.
I had my family coming in the house. I'm like, on the air.
Oh, I'll start with an introductory question to kind of get the ball rolling. That question is, from your perspective, how would you rate how Black men and women are getting along in U.S. society?
I'll go first. So, and if this light goes out, it's only because my cell phone battery died. so if you depending on which corner of social media you're on, you would think that our relationships were in the abyss and probably pummeled just because it seems like we can't get along. I know that we're struggling. I know that we have a lot of issues that are that have been with us for generations and some for centuries. But I also know that Black men and Black women love one another.
Mhm.
And that is
That's
evident
right.
because we're here, our families are thriving, you know, children are still being born. So it's, for me, it's a mix depending on which lens you put on and where you're looking at.
For me, that is a very, very complex question and not something that can really be just answered in the way of rating something. We have been through so much. There's no way at all that we can talk about our relationships or being Black or anything in this country without talking about what that has meant to be Black in this country and the way it has impacted us. We are growing together. We are growing strong together. That's one of the reasons that I am so committed to my community and so committed as a Black woman to my community and to my people, because I want to ensure that we grow through all that we have facing us, that we grow through this strong and together, while also not losing who we are, not losing what it is to be a Black woman, not losing what it is to be a Black man. We know that there are various, there's no one cardboard cut up definition of what being a woman or a man is, but we don't want to lose any of our identities. And we are growing together. We are growing through these things that we face together. And when we stand together, when we come together as a community, we can do anything. That is our hope. We are each other's hope.
I really want to piggyback on what you were saying, Lisa, regarding the complexity of your question.
Mhm.
I have to say this in regards to this questions and all of the other questions, just because I know we are talking specifically to the female experience. I'm a young person, my scope of things, my scheme of things. I know we're particularly talking about murder and conflict, but you know, Black people are spiritual, and these are just topics that are kind of hard not to speak about from a spiritual place and go to a spiritual place when you think about them. And so I feel the need to disclose. I think what's wrong with every avenue in the world, what's wrong with every avenue in the world is the rejection of divine femininity. You cannot talk about why the issues between men and women, male and female. And again, I appreciate you talking about how complex the question is, because now, before we can talk about white men and white women, Black womanhood, Black manhood, the whole construct of womanhood and manhood, before we even get into race in and of itself, is now being brought up for discussion. And you can't, it's really hard to talk about the origins of the divide between men and women without going to that place, because what we find across the board, whether we're talking about the perspectives of Black women, perspectives of women from Asian women, other cultures, unfortunately, this feeling of, you know what I'm saying, oppression, rejection, abuse, or something like that, unfortunately, those things are attached to some of those opinions and some of those views. I think that's kind of where we can find conflict with all of that. That's something that that's connected in all of our conflicts. If I were to speak on Black men and women, like right now, I think we're making progress in the sense that we're realizing that we do hold animosity towards each other, that we do hold resentment towards each other. I feel like for my parents' generation and my grandparents' generation, some of the things that we're talking about, they were just so normal to them, almost like tradition to them, that we would continue to talk about as we go forward, where now I feel like people in my age group and other age groups are starting to say, like, nope, we don't have to do this like this. We don't have to view this from this. I think we're starting to be more aware of our biases towards each other, I think, as a whole. I don't think we're aware of our biases enough to let go of them or to give our opinions without them being there. You know what I'm saying? There's a difference between denoting your bias because you're saying your opinion doesn't have that bias in it versus denoting your bias and saying my opinion still has that bias attached to it. But I really couldn't give a rating. I would just feel comfortable saying we're starting to open an eye about that relationship in itself.
Let me mention some concerns real quick. I'm always traveling, well, I used to before COVID. And I see Black men loving Black women and Black women loving Black men all over, particularly in predominantly Black parts of the country.
Mm-hmm.
However, I also hear in the backdrop, in terms of the soundtrack, about bitches and hoes,
Mm-hmm.
N-words.
Mm-hmm.
When I was real young, didn't know there were sisters who didn't want no scrubs.
Mm-hmm.
Some of y'all old enough. I see Ellen over making a face. You know what I'm talking about. You know, and there is language in popular music, particularly so-called hip hop, that can be very, very degrading from my perspective to women. And I believe, and I've actually witnessed that theme or that backdrop or soundtrack can impact how women are treated.
I agree.
I want to bring that up as an issue, if indeed I'm not seeing things, but you know, I see sometimes some really negative interaction. And well, I'll stop there because I can go further beyond the things that concern me that I want us to actually illuminate and talk about. Because so far, and I believe this is true, what you're saying from your experience, things sound like they're going to be relatively wonderful. And I think there's some real struggles we're having that are causing damage.
So, go ahead, Lisa.
No, go on. Well, I would just have to say, when we talk about what is currently going on with Black people within the United States and African people in general, again, we cannot at all dance around or not talk about the issue of colonialism and how literally we were robbed in a very unnatural way, kidnapped, brought into this country and had a world view, or had a view, it wasn't even a world view, but a colonialist view based on racism and white power and domination that was enforced on us. I mean, and what happened with people in this country, Black people in this country, who most of us came through what was called the transatlantic slave trade, although I don't even want to call it that because they were not trading slaves, they were trading human beings, human trafficking. But our view, the views of our ancestors were literally lobotomized from our memory. So what appears to be normal is not necessarily normal. It is based on a view that was inflicted upon us through terror, called colonialism. And so how we define our relationships and so much about what goes on in this world, we do it through that lens. We just have to really realize that there are other ways of viewing relationships, of viewing the world, of viewing our relationships, not just to each other, but to this world itself, that is quite different from what we think of as normal, because that's all we know. That's all we know. And it is an inadequate, insufficient, very, for lack of a better word, one-dimensional and not a multi-dimensional view at all. So we just have to be really aware of that. So even when we look at each other through these lenses of men and women, we have to understand where that came from. Personally, for myself, I'm not a feminist. I never have been one, because I think that's so limiting in terms of describing what we are dealing with as Black men and Black women. And so I had completely rejected that lens at all of dealing with what's going on in society. It is a reality. We are not the problem, but we do have a problem that we have to deal with. And you know, we have many, many manifestations of that problem. So I just wanted to just
Thank you.
say that.
Really appreciate you saying that. I think heavily because, like you said, there's certain, you know, the question of what we think is normal, but then there's also giving us ourselves permission, right? Once we become conscious of how we think and feel about things, giving ourselves permission to change those. But as a community, we have to be, I think, more collective about what that change looks like. And when you were speaking, what resonated with me was how, like you said, there was a version of Black womanhood and Black manhood before colonialism that we have to attach to. And the reason why I started off with what I said was, you know, a lot of Black people, when we return to our roots, where we want to go first, Egypt, right? The Egyptians understood that male, female, feminine, masculine were just opposites, right? We didn't put one over the other. And I really wanted to say I appreciated what you said about feminism, right? I think feminism is just a label depending on who you're talking to. It doesn't always, I think, denote a universal view of equality is what I say, or a version of equality that is most beneficial to Black people.
I'm a 70s baby. And so I remember, like I grew up more R&B. And so I remember when our music was about love and love making and men courting women and men wooing women. I remember that. And I remember in my 9th grade year of high school, NWA, listening to Straight Outta Compton. And I listened to Straight Outta Compton every single day. Like I would listen to it. I was fascinated by the music. I was fascinated by the genre. It was unlike anything I ever heard before. It was inappropriate. You know, being a 14-year-old, I'm attracted to stuff that's inappropriate. So I'm going to listen to it real loud while my mother's not home. And something in me understood that they were telling a story and that the story that they were telling was not something that I was supposed to absorb. So I knew that. And I watched music evolve. I watched even R&B go from talking about loving women to just talking about having sex with them and then moving on. And so having witnessed that transition, music used to be a representation of our community, and it used to be a barometer where we could see where we were in terms of the temperature in the community. I do not believe that music intentionally evolved into the barometer that it did. I think that it was pointed in a specific direction for a very specific reason. And unfortunately, life started imitating art versus art imitating life. And because people were telling stories, and people who don't have a sophisticated mindset, they can't always tell the difference between somebody telling a story and somebody portraying a character. So like I understood that rappers were telling stories and that these stories were real for some people, but I understood that these stories not real for you because you're not killing people and getting a record deal. Like that's not happening. But understanding that the average consumer, because we think that entertainment is real life, people wove that into, you know, their psyche, into the way that they moved, into the way that they talk. And now, where before you couldn't hit, like it was rare that you would hear a song where men, in R&B music, where men were calling women bitches. And now it is rare for you to hear a song where they're not calling women bitches. And I think because we are pressed for access, we are pressed to be seen, to be validated, and that makes us vulnerable to manipulation as a community. Yeah. And so there were a few of us who were willing to, and I'm going to use the term, sell themselves out and literally like poison the water that we were all drinking in our books and our music. And you couple that with all of the other stuff that's happening to us, and that's a recipe for disaster. Because music, for me, music is a spell. Music is chanting, music is messaging. And so we're just constantly hearing these same messages over and over. And you have to actively work to keep it from penetrating your psyche. And I don't even know if people realize that that is one of the purposes of music.
You know, this whole conversation about music and its influence on our community, I mean, people have written books about that, and we could certainly have a topic, just a discussion just around that. But I remembered, first of all, I completely missed the boat with rap music, because when I first heard it, I said, it will never last. This was like Run DMC, I think. I was so much into Marvin Gaye, I'm like, oh my gosh, how could they do that? They can't sing, it will never last. But still, what they were talking about was not what it would grow into becoming. And in fact, some of the precursors to that kind of rap music was, I remember there was this song, What's Happening, CC, or Chocolate City, and there were
Funkadelic.
yeah, and the precursors to what became known as rap, where they were talking about very real and serious things in our community that was going on. And it was gritty and it was raw, but it was the truth. And none of it was degrading, none of it at all. And Black people were singing about songs of love, but not just that. There was also powerful messages in that music. And I had been reading about the DJs, you know, the loss of the local radio stations, because they would be playing that music, but many times they would also be communicating messages. And there is this documentary that I had seen called, oh my gosh, it just went right out of my head, but it was about how children during the early 1960s, how they had organized and how they walked out of schools. The Children's March, I think was called. And this was in Alabama. And this was during the time when King felt that he was not reaching the people in the way that he had been able to reach them before. He felt that his movement was sort of losing a little bit of the passion. And they were coming down hard on the parents, and they would penalize them so hard if they participated in boycotts or if they participated in doing various things. So people began to organize the children. It's a really strong documentary. I think it is called The Children's March. And I remember that there was this radio DJ and how he would get on every single day with his messages to the children, with his messages in the music. And they were able to have a very powerful movement. And in fact, the organizing that was done for those marches at that time in Alabama was at the 16th Street Baptist Church. And later on that year, and it was 1963, they would be targeted for their activism. Because the 16th Street Baptist Church, that attack was deliberately a deliberate target. And it was on Children's Day that they did that. So
when you, Lisa and Ellen, when you were younger, wasn't music and the culture part of elementary, junior high school, or high school?
Yes. Yeah, we
That's
had art.
Right?
We had art. We learned how to play the xylophone. You know, like that. It was because we understand what art and music do just for the human spirit. So,
but that's been taken out of schools, hasn't it?
It's been removed out of schools. Probably, I might be stretching it, but probably for like gradually over the course of the last 25 years.
Yeah, I think that's important because. Well, somebody going to say something? Because I can.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to two things that you said, Ellen, that I think are really important to the question. Because I think what you were hinting at in your question was this, I think there's like a certain level of contradiction and how like we're allowing music to influence us, but the music that we're allowing to influence us is actually contradicting our core beliefs about ourselves. And so one thing that you said that was right on the nose was art went from imitating life to now life is imitating art. I talk to my friends all the time and I'm just like, yo, I'm actively trying not to set my expectations about relationships with the movies. Yep. But I don't feel like I got nothing real life to compare what I'm trying to do with. And then you were hesitant to use this word, but I really appreciated you saying this word because it's people that is, you know, in a position that have the knowledge that you have. And the reason why they're not doing what they're doing is because of money. They literally cash out. There's artists out here that, you know what I'm saying, their rap used to be conscious rap. Their music used to really be about us. And then they was like, well, that don't sell no more. Right. That don't sell no more. We don't make that no more. You know, my mom likes to quote Fat Joe all the time. It was grown people music. It was a time and a place for certain types of music. And now we're letting certain types of music dominate everything. And so even, I hate to say it, I have to call Cardi B out. Cardi B is a real one. Cardi B represents the real ones. But unfortunately, Cardi B be letting us know, I'm doing this for the coin. Right. The coin. Snoop Dogg coined the term rappers go through something called the Martin Luther King phase, right? You be raw, right? You be raw, you be yourself. Or some people don't come out raw, right? Not every artist comes out raw and then the label changes them. Some people, they come out with a label and then they have a breakthrough, right? And so then after they put out what they're putting out, they want to reform, right? But the way they go about, you know, changing their narrative isn't through the music. It's through other things like Nicki Minaj, right? You know, she put out one narrative and then she even says, you know, I think I put out a narrative. She, you know, one thing I can say, she holds her stuff accountable. She was like, I think I put out this narrative to young women that you could sell your body, that you could sell sex. I'm seeing girls do this, that, and the other. And I think my music may have influenced that, right? But the reason why I say Nicki is going through her Martin Luther King phase is, you know, when she had when she was out platforms to do that in her music, she wasn't, right? These are all comments that she's making now that she's not making music as much. She wasn't using her music to denote this epiphany that she had.
I have a question for the
panel. Yeah, so it was a few things, but just real quickly on the artist tidbit, I think one of the reasons why we have these quote unquote sellouts is because it's not beneficial to be pro-Black. Right. And I mean that in the sense, like, even if you look at what happened to Colin Kaepernick, like this man was ostracized and there was no real political movements or pushes that happened from our community to aid him. And then looking back at other incidents, like we have the stories of Breonna Taylor and like the idea of say her name, and how Black women are feeling left out in these spaces. Like it's not beneficial, right, to be pro-Black because of how our behaviors have changed over the course of the years, and music is definitely a huge part of it. But I'll end with this, and I just want to hear what you all think. But as a teacher, and even someone as young as myself, like, I didn't have the musical background that some of you all have. So I grew up with nothing but the N-words and B-words and hoes and all that. Like, so that's all I know, right? And then I go in my community and I see Black men and women acting and receiving each other this way, then I don't have a counter narrative. All of a sudden, this is just what Black people are, as opposed to it being a systematic structural thing that changed over time. And so I was just wondering, like, what thoughts that you have about that, because now the poison is here. So what do we do with it? Like, I know how the poison got here, but the person who's currently suffering, they don't care. They don't care how it got there. That's not how it works.
Well, right now, society is supposedly rebelling against the murder of George Floyd, Breonna, and on occasion, Ahmaud Arbery. I mention that because that's a blatant videotaped sensational example of anti-Black agendas. However, there's an anti-Black agenda happening in the music business too. That's just as horrible and just as deadly and doesn't get that kind of street protest. For example, there have always been so-called conscious rappers, but they always are marginalized by the music machine to make room for Lil Wayne, etc. The term sellout was used, I think it was Ellen who used the term sellout earlier, but sometimes the issue is not simply selling out. Sometimes the issue is what Duke mentioned, they don't know nothing else.
Right.
And you gotta be in to sell out. Some people are just out and have never even been in. And language is very, very powerful and specific to me. So that's why I use it very intentionally. And sometimes people are not really sellouts. Their logic base has been disrupted. Because it's illogical to have a mama that you loved at least at the beginning of your life and allow the terms bitches and hoes and stuff to be normal. But if your culture is uninformed about the fact, like what Lisa was raising around colonialism and these other agendas that are afloat, and that's not a part of your narrative, your critical analysis, you think you just supposed to be calling people N-words and hoes because there's no counter narrative. And then we get mad at somebody who doesn't have a counter narrative and call them names, sellouts and stuff, and there's a big old fight when didn't nobody really mean no harm. Sometimes all people know is anti-Black harm. That's all their brain has ever seen. I can go outside of my office right now and hear bitch and hoe blaring to the top of the speakers right now and talk to a brother or a sister, but particularly a brother, about that being problematic. They look at me like, what you mean?
Well, I want to say this. I think Black men and women find ourselves in these situations. And the reason why, that's what part of the reason why I denoted like all of those things I said earlier regarding spirituality is you cannot have these conversations without keeping in mind how interconnected everything is, right? So, and you're not having these conversations just to be like, I'm a Black man, I talk to Black women, this is what Black women are doing, I got the Black women in check, now I'm gonna go back to the, right? It's always an interconnected thing. And so what Black men have to keep in mind, and Black women too, is you kind of like don't get to decide what's offensive to us, right? When I'm talking to my girlfriends, right, and they call me bitch versus you calling me bitch, you kind of just don't get to decide when calling me a bitch is offensive, right? You kind of don't. Black men, y'all can say my nigga, but if I say nigga please, y'all mad at me, right? I don't get to decide when it's offensive to call
I'm
you.
regardless, by the way.
But not all Black people are like that. Some Black women, they don't want you to call them bitch, period. Some Black women, their girlfriends can say bitch, but other people can't call them bitch. Some Black men, Black male friends can call them the N-word, but they feel like they got the right to hit someone in the face. Someone non-Black calls them the N-word. So I feel like regardless if you're a person, don't use those words to define me, period, or a person that sometimes wants to use those words as the person that thinks they can use those words to address other people, you don't get to say when that is offensive. And so what Black people have to remember, their power is, what are we giving ourselves permission to think and believe about ourselves, right? There are Black women, you can walk up to them on the street, offer your perspective in a really non-threatening way, but something internally in them feels attacked, right? You have to keep in mind, like you said, some of us don't know nothing else. Some of us, the reason why when we are presented new information, we cannot develop a new view is because we're not used to giving ourselves permission to say, I thought this thing, I got new information, and my view is different, which is why I said I respect you for not using the word seller, because Black people can change their mind. We have to remember that. Just because Black people change their mind don't mean that we done sold out, right? That doesn't mean that all changes that we make in the community are permanent changes, right?
So I want to say, just for clarity, that my perspective about people selling out is, so it is pointed to the people who knew what was happening. And I'm glad that you made the distinction between people who made a conscious decision versus people who thought, like, this is all I've ever known. What do you mean I'm selling out? So I'm not, and I appreciate that very clear distinction. If I know for a fact, like I know that if I go outside right now and sell guns to my community, that my community is going to destroy itself. That's very different than someone who is coming behind me who has grown up with guns in their community their whole entire life, and they think that it's normal. So I'm speaking to the former and not the latter, but I just wanted to say that out loud. And thank you for giving me a more fine-tuned perspective about who it is that I'm talking about, because you're right. My 18-year-old, so I have an 18-year-old, a 25-year-old, and a 28-year-old. They know about music because I played music that I listened to their whole life. So they know about the 70s, they know about the 80s, they know about the 90s, and they still listen to the music that they listen to today, which would be very different than if I just grew up listening to NWA and that's all I ever played around my house and that's all they ever heard. So that's all that they were ever exposed to. So I appreciate drawing lines and making distinctions. Thank you.
I just also want to just revisit this a moment again to just say, and the reasons that I bring up in terms of what the music industry used to be like, the messages that we used to hear all the time, is because of the social engineering that happens. And I want to bring up about the radio station and activism, and how when you had local DJs who were really talking to the community and how they could really impact and influence people, because it did not happen by accident. In fact, the artists whose names just escape me, but like I said, some of the precursors to what became known as rap, was very successful in the communities. You can't even say that it wasn't making money, because I remember there was one, "Don't push me because I'm close to the edge. I'm about to lose my head. It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder. I keep them going under." I did them injustice, I know, but they were very successful. So this was not about, oh, they are not making money, but there was something that really began to happen. I remember growing up and I learned so much about the war through the music. Because you had the Temptations. The Temptations began singing what they called all these message songs. Marvin Gaye with "What's Going On." That's my favorite all-time album, and it was so powerful. And it wasn't just Marvin Gaye. You even had artists like Carole King, and they were their music and their message was so strong. And we began to see definitely a move away from that and a control in terms of the radio stations, the music industry, and what's going on. And suddenly, and like even when Run DMC first came out, although like I said, I was like, that music will never last, but still their music was fun, it was upbeat, it was uplifting, there was nothing offensive about it at all. And they were selling, they were doing good, and yet somehow it grew to be this very degrading kind of music. And I don't think that was at all an accident. I think I'll use the term socially engineering a lot. You began to also see the rise of drugs in the Black community and being targeted for the youth, because that was a very powerful movement when Black youth, I mean little kids, kindergartners, they were leaving their schools, they were rising up, they were challenging this system. And then after that, that was like the mid-60s, we began to see things change. In fact, we don't even hear any music talking about the war, and wars are going on. We don't hear that at all. So just had to throw that in there.
I want to mention, before I make another point, and Kashama, you can come in whenever you like. You've heard of T.I., right? Mm-hmm. T.I., I don't know if it was 4 or 5 years ago now, made a conscious effort not to make negative music anymore, and his record company got mad at him. Mm-hmm. And this, you can find the whole news report on Google somewhere. And he became self-evaluating and self-criticizing, saying, "I don't want to go out like this. I don't want to do this to my people." And he lost his popularity in terms of record sales. And then he tried to make up for that by being an actor to keep the money flowing. but he really had no choice in terms of keeping the money flowing because he wasn't allowed to make music anymore because he didn't want to make negative music. I mentioned that because one of the things that results, and I'm kind of making a point that I made before, but I'm expanding on it. One of the things that results in mass selling out is that we don't teach our children that they live in a society that's corrupt with white supremacy mythology.
Mm-hmm.
They think it's neutral. So when they watch television and they listen to the radio, they think, "Oh, this is neutral. This is my jam." They don't realize that there's no such thing as a song that says, "I'm not going back and forth with those kikes. I'm not going back and forth with those faggots. I'm not going back and forth with those cheeks." But we have a song that says, "I'm not going back and forth with the the N-word." I don't like to use it, but I know what the word is. Right. And it's all on the radio, and it's a big old hit. And we're sitting here grooving, not realizing that this is an agenda. Mm-hmm. Just like terms like black on black crime that you hear some black people say out of a complaint about, let's not talk about police brutality, let's talk about black on black crime. They don't realize that there's such thing as white on white crime, which outnumbers
everybody crime.
Right. I mean, every group experiences most of their crime inside of their own group. But a lot of us don't have a critical analysis. We don't have a critical lens, which makes us, by default, in my opinion, in society, anti-black. Mm-hmm. And the anti-black behavior is simply called selling out in many cases, when it's really just a chronic symptom of internalized white supremacy, unresolved and unidentified. And I think we should start looking at things that way, because one of the reasons why black people, in this instance, black men and women, but black people period, could be in conflict, because we can be mad at each other for being black.
Yes.
Because we have an unresolved confusion in our psyche about black being bad. And it's like, F you, N-word. And even when we don't say it out loud, we behave it. Mm-hmm. Like when I was real little, I'm probably a little younger than Ellen, but when I was real little, I'm just kidding, Ellen. I'm the oldest man in this group by far. We used to speak. I don't care if you travel across the country from LA to Mississippi to New York, black people, what's up, brother? What's up, sister? What's happening, cuz? And everybody was a cuz, because cuz meant cousin. And we always talk to each other. And as somebody who examines behavior, I walk around the planet very intentionally, and I walk and I look and I experience what I experience. And I have to do like this sometimes to the black person coming in my way so they can see me, because I'm getting ready to speak. Because they getting ready to go straight ahead and act like, and I mean literally act like, because they can see me. I'm 6 feet tall, etc. Act like they don't see me. And some people, maybe this is true for Inshira, I don't know, are too young to realize that we used to, as a collective, speak to each other. And now some of us don't call each other brother because we don't want to offend white people. Even if they're not around, and they're in here, but even if they're not around, we don't want to offend them. So we accommodate whiteness even in all black spaces.
I wanna offer something to you. In having conversations about safety in our community. So it's been my experience that part of the reason that we don't greet each other, that we're not warm towards one another, is because we shifted into like this protective shell. So I remember seeing the beginning of the onslaught of the crack epidemic. I remember being a young child and seeing people in the neighborhood that I grew up with. I watched them slowly deteriorate. And something in my mind knew and understood that these people were very different. I did not know why, but I knew that they were very different. And watching a person lose, look like they're physically losing their humanness and turning into a zombie, or look like they're turning into a zombie, is frightening. And it's shocking. And I knew and understood, because I have a brother who has issues with addiction, that in my mind, it was like a safety issue. So I really can't have him in my house, because if he's in my house, I'm not exactly sure what he's going to do. I'm hoping that he won't do anything, but I understand that he has an addiction, so he might be liable to do a whole lot of different things. And I feel like that's an undercurrent in our community that we never fully recovered from. So
Absolutely.
we're looking at each other, you know, and you know, we watched crime increase. We watched all of these things happen. And so we kind of turn inward on ourselves, and we're like, so being a Black woman walking down the street, a Black man speaks to me, depending on whether or not I make eye contact with him, he might think that his hello is an invitation to come walk with me. And I'm like, I just said hi. Like, you said hi to me, so I said hi to you. And I can't tell you the number of times that I've made eye contact with a Black man, might have smiled, said hi, and he took that as, oh, I'm gonna get your phone number. And so now my reaction to that is, if I'm walking down the street and a Black man speaks to me, I don't make eye contact with him. I'll still speak, but I'm not looking at you, because looking at you means, like, it turned into something else. And so that sense of community and the sense of warmness and friendliness has been eaten away by a lot of different things that I don't know that we take into consideration often enough when we think about the ways that we relate to one another.
I think, because I really appreciate you saying it, because there's also Black men and women I'll speak to. I'm from Baltimore. Wendy Williams is tripping if she thought she put "how you doing" on the map. That's how we say hello. We say "how you doing," being from like a native to Baltimore. Like, I do remember that time where if I was sitting on my stoop and you was coming up from behind me, you announced yourself. You said hello, so I saw you come by. But nowadays, like you said, there's something happened to us in our inner humanity that we've left unaddressed for so long. And all I can say is, now that we're aware of that, we have to keep reminding ourselves of this. Two things I'm gonna just keep repeating: the interconnectedness of everything, and Black people's resistance to the change. Like, those are just two things that I'm gonna just keep repeating, because like I said, some people look like they don't want you to talk to them, right? Sometimes I'm torn between wanting to speak to be respectful and feeling like I'm gonna irritate an introvert today. So it's just, the more we remind ourselves, the more we have to give ourselves permission to release these things that we become conscious of.
I think, at least the point that I usually deal from, and that's the understanding that we are people who have experienced so much pain. We just cannot get around that. You know, our relationship in this country began with trauma, horrible trauma, being terrorized. And we have had to fight our way. Like, when I look at Black men and Black female relationships, because Black women were spared nothing. We were whipped as well, and we had to fight. You know, we had to fast forward all this stuff about what a woman does and does not do, and Black men as well. And we've had to fight together. And like I said, we've internalized that many times. But I usually start from that perspective. It doesn't mean that I'm going to excuse inappropriate behavior. I got to the point, and I happen to be kind of tall. I've always been into working out, but I got to the point when I'd be walking down the street. If somebody approached me in a very disrespectful way, I wouldn't even acknowledge them. I wouldn't be rude about it, but I would just, you know, if they were like, or whatever, or saying something that sounded so stupid, I'm like, they're not talking to me. I'm not going to even respond to that. And I would find that that would usually be respected. But if I remember their humanity, you know, if they said hello to me or something like that, then I would always respond to that. And sometimes they might want to come up and talk or whatever. And I had to learn, because I'm a commuter and I'm out there all the time. Sometimes I'm coming home late or whatever. I mean, I'm, you know, Newark, New Jersey. I come through Newark, New York. And I had to, at least for myself, feel a certain sense of connectedness to the people that I'm walking down the street, you know, that I'm walking. But so I began to understand that I don't want to make people resentful, and I don't want to make enemies. And usually I have found that if somebody is approaching me in a very disrespectful way and I don't respond to that, they know they are. They will usually just walk away, or I'll keep on walking, or maybe I might have to stay a little bit more, but I won't usually run into any kind of a problem with that. And I just, for myself, I had to understand that there would be some give and take, that sometimes people might be, you know, they don't mean any harm. They don't realize that what they're doing or saying, because they're not saying anything really that is necessarily offensive. And sometimes they are. When they are, you let them know that they are. You're not going to tolerate that. But for myself, I said, I'm going to do a little give and take, because I wanted to feel that sense of connectedness. I didn't, you know, and there were times when I found that sort of paid off. I remembered one time when I was a lot younger and somebody said hello to me, and I was like, that was my attitude. And that person responded in such a very, very strong way. He really did. I never forgot it. But it just made me realize and say, he said hello to you. I should have at least said hello back. And it would have taken nothing from that, because he was like, you don't. And that's the only time when I've really seen that happen. I've never seen that happen in any other way. You know, if they're being disrespectful to me, they know they're being disrespectful. They know they're making some derogatory comments, and I don't respond to it. I keep it moving, I keep it going. Don't even act like I don't even see them.
I want to say that while I believe that a good portion of interactions happen the way that you say that they are, that plenty of times Black women are assaulted and harmed.
That is true.
You know, trying to stave off the advances of a man. Like, it's Black women. There was a running joke in high school that, you know, you got to speak to men, because if you don't, they're going to throw bottles at you. Like, that's because that was a real experience for people. And so it is, yes, I do believe that people's humanity should be respected. I also am acutely aware of the harm that happens to women when they don't respond to a man's advances. Like, you can't give a guy a fake number now, because he's standing there with his cell phone and he's gonna call a number while you standing there and gonna get mad if it's not the right number. And some men
won't let you reject them soft either. Some men will not let you reject them nicely. Sometimes I really do. I'm a bubbly person, but there are days where I actively put on a bitch face. Like, I'm actively walking around looking like, do not talk to me. I just want to go about my business. And oddly, people want to talk to me. And there have been times where I've like outright said, like, I don't mean no harm. Like, I just don't want to talk to you. And people still want to talk. But what I want to bring back up was, I had mentioned something about awareness, and Lisa, you had mentioned something about give and take. It was like through our awareness that we can have a give and take. Because I'm a Black woman, I'm a native to Baltimore, but I'm not gonna front y'all, I'm from Baltimore County, okay? I have walked by Black men, tried to, you know, get a vibe. They get a little too close to me, and I flinched before. And I know I'm not flinching because they're Black. I know as a Black woman, I'm not flinching because they're Black. I'm flinching because it's dark outside and you do look mean. And I don't know if you look mean because of facial tension or because I don't know what happened to you before I saw you just now. You know what I mean? And so it's through awareness we can appropriately do the give and take, right? Because in some instances, like you said, it's best to ignore those people. And in some instances, we have to remind ourselves we don't have to cut off from those people. It may be beneficial to just acknowledge that person as we go on about our day.
Well, this part of the conversation, I think.
I have a question, and it's been burning me for a while ever since we've been on the music conversation. But I do want to acknowledge what those sisters were saying, because I've always thought this, but I didn't really know what was going on, because I come from down south and we speak too. It's not even about like a long time ago. It's just how we kind of are. And even if you're not in a huge city down south, you will still come across people that speak. Sometimes you'll be riding out in rural areas and you will ride past somebody's house that's sitting on the porch. They'll wave at you as you ride by. So I'm very used to speaking to people. And I
wave back at you when you come back. They speak to you twice.
Right, but I've gotten what you call the bitch face from sisters, and I've gotten the don't talk to me and the looking away or whatever, and immediately I feel sorry for sisters when they do that. I honestly, I be feeling like it's your loss. And I'm not, and you know, that's my honest assessment when I'm passing by sisters, you know, like that, because I'm like, well, it's not for no reason. You know, we do things for a reason. It's usually based on some type of trauma, you know. But at the end of the day, I'm looking like, well, I'm the rider. You passing up the rider right here. You know, you're passing up somebody that is going to actively protect all Black people, men, women, whatever. So, you know, I'm glad you brought that up. And I think that's one of the first steps in Black men and Black women healing a lot of our relationships and how we interact with each other by expressing that and understanding where each other are. And when we verbalize it, it puts it more into context for us so that maybe we can gauge each other a little bit better. Maybe, you know, I'm not the type of person that walks around smiling. I may look aggressive. My voice is deep. I don't speak very melodically, you know. So, you know, but I think as long as we put things into context and start looking at each other in a more human light, I think that's the first step. Now, my question, it stems from you talking about the music business, and we know everything that they do is not always generated by money. A lot of it's for propaganda and power, but a lot of it is generated by money. We talked about the crack epidemic. And what's jumping out at me is capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And what I want to ask you all is, what is your analysis on capitalism's role, or what type of wedge do you think capitalism drives between Black men and Black women, or how we see each other?
See, anybody that spoke capitalism, they fought capitalism because capitalism worked for them. If capitalism was set up to benefit Black people, more Black people would be into capitalism, right? And that's so far what I can give you, right? People that like capitalism oftentimes benefit from it, right? It's hard to get a real concrete opinion about a system such as capitalism if you do not benefit from it in any kind of way. And so I think capitalism, like I said, we have to know where our power lies, right? What is the difference between Black people that's changing their minds? What is the difference between Black people that are selling out? What is the difference between Black people that are actively resisting the change that they could bring about versus the Black people that are simply just conditioned to be that way? I had earlier wanted to ask you, Cleo, why did you bring up T.I.? Why did you bring up T.I.? Because T.I. is a perfect, I think T.I. could be a really good example in answering your question. Yep, I can align T.I. with my Martin Luther King face comment. I can align T.I. with just your question. And like, I've seen T.I., like I physically have seen, like I've mentioned Cardi, discourage someone from making a choice in how we are projecting music or how we are projecting some media. And he is actively talking about money. And then when we go criticize T.I. for this choice that he made about money, he will go into some everybody's against the Black man stuff, right? So I think, so when you talk about that, you have to keep in mind people's consciousness, right? That's something you can't really talk about too good without throwing yourself and a couple of people under the bus. Like for example, have you seen the show Rhythm and Flow of T.I., Chance the Rapper, Cardi? So in one of the rounds in the show, right, it's a competition show. Chance is spaced to choose between two rappers from his hometown. They got two different styles, right? But the viewer can see it. The people on the TV in real time can see that this one particular rapper is like really aggressive. And Chance can see that, right? It's his decision. And Chance can also see this other rapper who she's got a lot of sustenance in her art. And it's not that Chance doesn't think both ladies have sustenance in their art, right? But this is, again, my perspective of a viewer of something I'm trying to bring into context. T.I. actively was telling Chance, like, ratings, bruh. Remember, we need someone that, like, you know what I'm saying? People is watching this, bruh. So again, I don't think, some things I don't think we can just say it's money, and some things I don't think we can just say it's our conditioning. It's the choices, like, yeah. So
well, hopefully.
I'm asking more specifically about, like just personal Black male female relations in our community, not so much as, you know, what's happening, you know, as far as celebrities or how that plays out. I'm wondering what the panel's analysis is on how capitalism plays out in our homes and our communities, and what, if any, wedge does that drive between Black women and Black men?
So this narrative, and I have no idea about where this narrative came from, that men are providers. That's what that reminds me of. And so a man who does not have money in the community can be looked at as a person who does not have value. And a man, women, without making like really wild generalizations, there is an expectation that if we're in a relationship that you're able to provide for me. If you're unable to provide for me, and if you're unable to provide in any, wait, what just happened?
We can hear you, we can hear you.
Okay. And I'm sorry,
I think that was me.
no, it wasn't you. My computer just, it went to sleep. Okay.
We can hear you and see you.
I'm gonna have to touch my keys every now and again to make sure that it stays up. So, and what that is making me think about. So that's a wedge that I see, when in terms of like capitalism. A man who does not have money has nothing. He has nothing to offer his children. He has nothing to offer a woman. He has nothing to offer his community. And so, I don't have an answer to it. I just know that is something that is really pervasive in our community. Men without money, they don't have any inherent value. And so
Kind of goes back to that song, I don't got time for no scrubs.
Yeah. I mean, so to be really clear, like I don't want to date a man who can't like at least meet my minimum, but to just disregard men, especially with, not taking into account like all of the things that play into a Black man not being able to get a job, or a Black man not being able to keep a job, like, and it's layered and it's complex and it's all of these things that go into it. But at the core of it, if we're walking down the street and I think you're attractive, you think I'm attractive, we speak to each other, we exchange numbers, we're getting to know one another, and we're talking, and I find out that you're unemployed and you live in your mother's basement, like it is like that, things like that, it makes things very complicated. And so when you said wedge, like that was what I thought about.
And let me just say this, what you're bringing up is very real, because the truth of the matter is people should be basing relationships on a basis of things that are mutually benefit. They mutually benefit each other. Of course, women and men, or two people want to become partners, you should be looking at, oh my gosh, what is this person going to be able to bring? And what am I going to be able to bring? Nobody wants to be poor. I don't know if anybody, when they're a child and they're thinking about what they want when they grow up, and they're gonna say they want to be struggling, and
we're not on the list.
I think those are very realistic things and very realistic expectations. And there's nothing wrong with Black women wanting that. We should definitely want that. Why bother dating them? Or why bother dating anybody? Why, if you are not going to be able to realistically say, I would like for this person to be able to complement my life in this way?
Equally yoked.
That's the reality. However,
my concern, Lisa, and this goes back to the earlier comment about speaking to each other or not speaking to each other in the street, is how we treat each other.
Well,
I mean, we're not all the same. We all have different, we come from an economic, cultural strata, background strata, blah, blah, blah. But the music that we're listening to, which has become, like someone earlier mentioned about life, art, imitating life, etc. I see us in too large of a numbers not treating each other well. And it's ironic given the issues that you raised, Lisa, regarding what we have all been through.
Exactly.
What we have all been through. And it's interesting what Kashama said about how people in the South treat each other. We all are from the South. Sooner or later, if you go a few trees, before today. And I just get concerned about how we treat each other and how there's a toxicity sometimes between us because of a whole lot of festered, unhad conversations.
Mhm.
I do agree. One of the things that I just wanted to get back to with capitalism, because, and I sort of use capitalism and colonialism interchangeably, but there are many layers to this, is because when you have been systemically denied, not just denied, but you've had barrier upon barrier placed upon you. And I remember in my generation, maybe seeing this a little bit more because Black fathers who were absent was very real. I remembered a lot of families when I was, growing up. My family, I had a two-parent household, but I remember that there were quite a few that did not. And what you just mentioned, Brother Kashama, in terms of the relationship with Black men and Black women, I think that has been a major thing. I think that will also be one of the reasons why sometimes people stay together who should not. Because if you don't feel that you have other alternatives, if you don't feel that you have a safety net that you can rely on, if you don't feel you have those things, it's going to impact your judgment. And when you have all of these things that you have to deal with, it is going to also impact your judgment. I mean, I can recall sensing sometimes, when Black men, they had children, trying to be a family person, and the Black woman has to be the one to go out and get work, and she's not even really being paid what she should be paid, because the only kind of work she could get at some point was basically working in a white person's home, and she has to carry that load because the man is not gainfully employed, and this is socially engineered, socially designed. Oh, yes, I think it affected us terribly, definitely, and also began to perhaps set a way for how we communicate with each other. And I also have to
Lisa, some people will say to you, well, you're dwelling on the past. Everything is great now. We had a Black president. What are you talking about? That's some old time slavery dated thinking. Things are different now, and we have a whole lot more choices and control now. And what you're saying is old school stuff that's not relevant anymore. How would you respond to that?
I would tell them that they're colonized, that they need to lose their colonized mind.
You say, oh, you're colonized. That's what you're gonna tell them?
Yeah, I'm gonna say.
I don't know how well that's gonna go over. You just say
if they're Black, I would say you need to lose your colonized mind, and if they're white, I would tell them mind your business. This doesn't pertain. You benefited from this, and I would say that argument that you're making is as ridiculous as saying that when the United States won the Revolutionary War, that it has no impact on you today. Nobody could say that. Nobody could realistically say that at all. Because I guarantee you right now, if the United States did not win the Revolutionary War, things would be looking different for us today. I don't know how. I mean, personally, I could have given a crap whether they won it or not. But that's as ridiculous as saying that.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, sister.
Right.
Duke, you gotta say, huh?
I'm sorry. People creating dichotomies is also an issue. So using and versus or. So yes, we have made progress and we have been standing still and regressing at the same time. So it's not that it's one or the other. Like these things are happening all at the exact same time.
Duke, you trying to say something?
I am.
Duke, let me tell you something real quick while you're talking. When you go to the left, you become blue and beheaded. So you might want to try to stay in a certain position where we can see.
All right, let me
his brother. Okay.
Let me see.
I just want to say.
No, Lisa, hold on a second, Lisa. Duke is getting ready to say something. He's back. His head is on.
Okay.
All right. I'm trying to figure out how to shorten this, so my apologies. But when I think about Dr. Joy DeGruy's post-traumatic slave syndrome, constantly what I'm reminded about is the fact that everything that we've been through has been with no therapy. And consistently, as I talk to some of my elders in my community as well as younger folks, like I'm hearing about the stories that have just been unresolved, right? Conflict between Black men and Black women since times of slavery, but even during the lynching period, when it was majority Black men who were consistently being hung and castrated out in the streets, and women were the ones who were the survivors and looking on and constantly carrying the torch forward. And conversations that developed during that time period, such as telling young Black men, don't try to buck against the system, just get a job and don't be an entrepreneur, because bucking against the system gets you killed. But there was no conversation about why we're telling Black men that. It's just, you know, don't don't buck against the system, just do what you're told type thing. And they became conflicts of interest between Black men and Black women there during that particular time period. I also know earlier in this conversation, we're talking about how we talk about and receive each other about when we are crossing each other in the streets. And I think another thing that happens is that another reason why we have this shell up is because a lot of times when we have successfully come together, we were bombed or tortured or degraded in our communities. Like consistently, whenever there was Black unity, there was major death. And major repercussions that happen in our particular communities, unresolved. So yeah, there is like this, I believe, a natural reflex at that point to not commune, because communing does mean death. I get really torn up in these particular situations. So like, if y'all go back and watch this stream, there was multiple times before I was beheaded where I'd be like doing this. I get really emotional during this conversation, right? Like I am consistently in worry about how Black men and Black women receive each other, because like even when we talk about these things, and we touched on it a little bit, but how colonization has constructed the conversation of gender and constructed the conversation of how Black men and Black women are supposed to interact with each other. It's all racist. It's all part of the exact same system, but we're all just trying to prove our woundedness to each other. And I don't know how to navigate these situations. And one of them for me, and I don't want to stay on this too long, is someone's audios. Okay.
Thank you, Deanna, for muting yourself.
All right. I don't want to stay on this for too long, but it's just like there seems to be individuals who validate and put on this triumph of like saying things like Black men are the white men of our communities, and people who will say that Black women ain't nothing but bees and hoes. And these are the individuals that select communities of us go to and champion as our leaders, right? Like me, when we're talking about, am I confusing when I see your face?
No. Can I explain why I'm having this hallelujah moment? What you're saying is giving me this hallelujah moment and explains why I went on my tangent about T.I. like I did.
But sure, be kind of brief, because now we have other people waiting. I want to hear you. So I want to hear what you have to say. But we have other people. We have Deandra and Andre here. We want to get other people involved in the conversation. So let's try to go going forward, so we can make sure we get all voices in.
Oh, to focus on going forward, I feel like what Duke is saying leads me up to my question, astounding on that question and kind of adding on to it. I don't think capitalism just has a family as a whole, right? Capitalism has an effect on what your grandma feels like you should pursue your degree in. Capitalism has an effect on whether your family feels like you should be a Black entrepreneur versus a Black employee. I just wanted to briefly say that.
Thank you, Shira. Deanna, what's your perspective? I see you there. What's going on?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very, very well, yes.
Okay, but I can't hear. It's like someone is still talking, so my audio is off.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, we hear and see you very well.
You might need to log out and come back in to.
Okay. Yes.
Can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm going.
She's suggesting that you log out and.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Andre, while we're waiting on her, what do you have to add, if anything?
Yeah, I logged in because there's a lot of what is being said is resonating for me First of all, I just want to make sure y'all can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. A lot of it's resonating for me because as a Black trans man, I grew up with the same kinds of hostilities or being taught as or socialized as females are. So I can resonate with that idea that Black men are a threat. You know, I grew up with, being told, don't speak to strangers, especially Black men. And coming from a society, coming from a family that's from the Caribbean, there was this extra added layer of American Black men ain't shit. I'm sorry if I sound emotional because this is really resonating for me. Mostly because after learning, after speaking with Cleo and watching videos and, coming to, underneath, I always understood that there was this level of anti-Blackness that's internalized. And I've been fighting with it, trying to let go of those ideas. So when I hear my sisters talking about this, I'm like, oh yeah, I can resonate with that. But then I remember, look, I transitioned. So people see me and they see me in that light and, I'm a threat. And that's, as a Black man, that becomes a new thing for me because I'm like, I'm not used to that. I'm used to being on the other side of that. I'm used to being on the side with the sisters. So I'm having to unlearn all of this, and have to, navigate the world in a completely different light and trying to understand, okay, why are these people so hostile to it? Oh yeah, I forgot. What I present to these people now is what Cleo presents to these people, is what Duke presents, is what all these Black men present as a threat, which is why there's all this hostility, which is why George Floyd is dead now, and Eric Garner is dead, and Mike Brown is dead, because we present this threat as Black men, and we wear this, we internalize it, and we don't know what to do with it because it's like, okay, there hasn't been up until maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. I don't remember when I first met you, Cleo, but right around that time, up until that point, there was no intervention to help us understand this is what's going on, So when I hear my sisters talking about, don't talk to me, I understand that. I get it. I really do get it. Because it's like, I'm still carrying some of that around with me when Black men, and I moved from New York to the South. I'm in North Carolina now. And when Black people, say hello to me, I have to remember, this is the South. This is how people function. This is how they interact. It's not that they're trying to come on to me or anything. It's just people being friendly and saying hello, because that's what they're taught. When you see other people, you say hello. And when you enter a room, and it's the same thing for Caribbean people. You better not enter a room and see your elders in there and not say hello. Oh Lord, you will never hear the end of it. You'll get a beat down. So, it's having to navigate all of that, and I can relate to what our sisters are going through. I'm like, oh yeah, I get that, because I grew up learning those very same values. Don't trust Black men. Even when they say hello to you, don't say anything. It's going to be hell to pack.
Thank you, brother.
So
Thank you.
I never learned, like nobody ever, so that's not completely true, but it wasn't taught to me or said to me like very directly not to trust Black men. I wasn't raised, so I was raised in a family full of women and men weren't always around. So, husbands left, boyfriends left. And our family dynamic is very strange in that we have tension between the women and somehow we coddle the men. So the dynamic is really weird, but No, I didn't learn until I was probably in my very late teens, early 20s, that Black men could be harmful to me. I knew that they could potentially be harmful emotionally to me, but like physically, that wasn't something that I learned or something that I even came to believe. It was when I started interacting with my peers and people in my peer group, and I noticed that even older men, so I uh, almost 15 years ago, you know, I'm walking home and there's a group of men standing on a corner and there's this one man, and I would get this a lot because people think that I'm younger than what I am. And so they would try to talk to me and they would ask me how old I was. And when I would tell them, they would be like, oh, good, because I thought that you were younger. And I'm like, well, if you thought I was younger, then why are you trying to talk to me? Like, what is that about? And so it was through my direct interaction with Black men that I learned, and hearing my sisters talk and listening to other women's experiences. But like that was my reality. But it wasn't, I don't think that I ever said to myself that I hate Black men or that, I'll never be with another Black man or anything like that. I just am acutely aware that there are some Black men who are hurting in their own way, and so they can hurt me. And there are some Black men who are just dangerous to our community. But it's
Ellen, I noticed something earlier in this conversation, and this might be presumptive on my part, that you are peculiar in that, I mean, when you start talking about music, you were able to discern, apparently at a young age, between toxic music that you put in context and music that was loving and nurturing, and you were able to make some decisions or critique the difference.
Yeah,
that's weird. That's not necessarily the norm.
Oh yeah, I know that. Yeah. Most people hear it and they're like, "Oh, that's what I'm." I hear Lil' Kim, so I'm supposed to act and dress like Lil' Kim, and I'm like, "That's her." Like, I'm not supposed to be like that.
Yeah. So I think it's important that we are educating people in our audience who can learn to be more critically analytical and understand, as I said earlier, that we do not live in a neutral context. We live in a minefield, an anti-Black minefield. And that's not because Black people are bad. It's because white supremacy is a problem, and it's a corruption, and along with colonialism, which is this twin sibling. These are problems that we don't allow our children to know about. A lot of us are busy assimilating, keeping up with the Joneses, trying to anesthetize pain by material overindulgence and all kinds of unusual things that we're doing to cope instead of transforming society or transforming our behavior so we can be an asset to Black people instead of another problem for Black people. But before the conversation ends, because we're not going to be here forever, though we likely will be coming back, I want to raise some specific issues that I want the sisters to address that I have heard sisters talk about. One is, and I'm going to put out some passages that you've heard that you may or may not agree with, but I want you to respond to them. Homosexual men are a problem because they're taking brothers away that we could have had, number one. Number two, male to female trans women, as they call themselves, are not really women. They need to sit their butts down because there's real women on earth, which is us biological women, and what they talking about. Now, there's probably people on this conversation maybe who have, quote, evolved and all that stuff. But I don't want to talk to the evolved you. I want to talk to the you.
I don't have nothing to say.
That could help somebody who is not evolved, which I think is a whole lot of folks, probably a few million, to get from their perspective, not necessarily to agreement, but to critical consideration, critical analysis, or less combative perspective. Because some people just said, F that stuff, and they got this gender demand-based analysis or reaction. It's more of a reaction than analysis. And I want to talk to you, your unevolved self, regarding a perspective on all these homos getting in the way of real Black men being present in my life or being accessible, and these trans people hollering at they women, though they were born with penises. What's your unevolved perspective on that?
I would have to say,
You don't get to be quiet, Ellen, but go on.
for me, because I'm gonna be real, we're keeping it real. I can recall being younger and the sisters, and we would say in a joking way, but because you would see a lot of guys who were so good looking and nicely built, and you would find out that they were same gender loving, and there used to sort of be like a running joke. Why is it always those guys? You could, the ones who seem to have so much going for them. And I think for myself growing up, because the reality is we know people like that in our families. We know people like that who are
like
our
what?
friends, and we know people who tried to hide their life, and the result in doing that was very, very, painful for a lot of people. And so I think for myself, just the more that I was around people, the more that I was sort of open. I was always somewhat of an open person. I was always curious in terms of the why of somebody. I always wanted to know their why. I just had to come to the realization that everything is not just one way, that there are many different ways that things can be. And I remember I used to hear growing up, oh, well, war is God's way of preventing the world from being overly populated. I'm like, you see wars being that way, it seems to me like a better way would be if you had same gender loving people, because not everybody's going to be a producer. So that was always interesting to me. But for myself, I think just the more that I was around people and that I would see things, and I never thought that, oh my gosh, there's so many same gender loving men and they're going to be a threat to me or whatever. I never really looked at it like that. But I do remember in terms of the issue of being trans, because so I know when I was growing up, that was just unusual. I mean, I think I know, you were born a man or you were born a woman, and then sometimes you could be born intersex, I think, and those are people who ostensibly have both male and female genitals. And that just took a lot for me to just do a lot of listening and to hearing. And I used to say, well, if somebody's trans, they're just going to go and change their identity and they'll go get the operation and they'll go and live off someplace and not even acknowledge that they were trans or anything like that. And I remember it as I became involved in being an activist. And that just helped to make me more open to different kinds of people because of the stances that people that I would be affiliated with would take. And that's helped me a whole lot, to open up my world. And then when I met people who were trans, and I would just listen, because I just wanted to know, I wanted to understand the why. And it took me a lot to understand, and when I say a lot, because I never believed in persecuting anyone. If I understood somebody or not, I was not going to do that. I was not going to do that at all. But it just took a lot of listening, a lot of hearing, a lot of understanding. And if somebody says, this is who I am, I believe them. And I remember listening to a show one time with these little children, it was Tyra Banks. And these parents were saying that they're little children who don't even know what sex is, really, 3, 4, 5 years old, you don't really look at the world deliberately from a sexual identity. And they were talking about that they were not, they were born a boy or whatever, but that they were a girl or the reverse. So it's a process. It truly is. But we should understand that we can never respond to people with hatred and with anger and with trying to hurt them simply because we don't understand them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Powerful. Anybody else want to have a relatively brief, unlike Lisa, relatively brief.
Before I say what I want to say, I just want to make sure you just want us to respond to those phrases that you have given, right? You just want us to respond.
I want an unevolved, because perspective. Look at
a raw, unevolved
one.
I want to, because you used to have, Lisa talked about her genesis. She talked about earlier not understanding, and even though there were people who were same-gender loving in the mix, there was no real understanding. Then when trans people came along, it was like, huh? And then over time, they learned. So I don't want to have a conversation that's based on people's revelations, because people who are at the non-evolved state or disagreement state, they would probably just see it simply as that, cannot learn from somebody who was only talk about, oh, I accept everyone. Because not everyone accepts everyone.
No, so I understand that. So what I would offer to people would be to challenge the reasons why you have or take issue with another person's humanity and the expression of their humanity. So a lot of people lean on religion, and a lot of people lean on biology, and I understand why people do those things, but I also understand that religion can be toxic, and biology as a science, the way that we've known it, can be wrong. Like, if we're human beings, so we've gotten things wrong. They used to think that the world was flat, and some people still argue that it is, but like there are, you know what I'm saying? Like that we can get it wrong. And so just because you've learned something and that's what you've known your whole entire life, or that's what you have been indoctrinated into, or that has been what has been bled into your psyche, that does not necessarily mean that it's right. And so that would be my response to them, that I would challenge, especially as someone who understands what it feels like to be oppressed. It is really confusing. Well, it is and it's not, but it's really confusing to me when Black people oppress other people. When Black people oppress other people who are either different or the same from them, that have different expressions. I'm really confused by that.
Well, Ellen, one of the things that's going on, and I want to hear from you, Inshira, after I finish. I know you have something to say, but I want to mention this. A lot of people who I've met, Black folks, who are repelled, disgusted, or disagree with same-gender loving people or trans people, as far as they're concerned, they're protecting Black people. They're coming from a place of protection. They feel like there's being pedophilia being allowed to run rampant. One of the things that goes on for a lot of Black people unconsciously, both male and female, particularly male, is that we've discussed already about Black men being the least employed. We live in a patriarchal society that values Black men, that values men, not Black men. We live in a patriarchal society that values men and manhood, and Black men have not been allowed by white supremacist systems to show up reliably employed, reliably fearless, reliably knowing they can live a long life, because it might get interrupted. So I call those social castrations. So here you come volunteering to be castrated by talking this homosexual stuff. I'm not saying that's how I feel. I'm telling you that that's a real perspective. And you're going to co-sign some more Black male castration by being a homosexual. You're going to co-sign some more Black male castration by dressing like a woman, which in the patriarchal society is a step down from being a man. What in the hell is wrong with you? And then you're going to do it publicly and influence our Black children to grow up to be voluntarily castrated? That perspective calls itself helping Black people and intervening on something that's destructive to the Black community. That's a real perspective.
Right, and I get it, but it's inhumane, and Blackness is not inhumane. So that would be my challenge to that person. So it is difficult for me. So first of all, the link between pedophilia and homosexuality is very confusing for me and is disgusting. And I don't understand why people do it. I would need for somebody to give me like something very tangible about why they make that connection, because I don't understand it. And so Blackness is not a monolith, and it is all encompassing, and it has so many different expressions, and all heterosexual Black people don't have children. There are Black women who are born biologically female who cannot have children. And so ostracizing a person because they identify the way that they do and masking that as caring for your community while dehumanizing that person does not make sense to me. Because at the end of the day, however a person chooses to express their humanity or however they express it, because it's not always a choice, who are we as a community to say to a person that the way that your expression is invalid, especially if it's not? Now, we can argue about what harm is and what harm is not, but the way that I show up in the world, just being myself, like I would argue that you can't tell me that I'm harming my whole entire community because I'm expressing myself the way that I was born or the way that I feel inside, or and not in terms of homosexuality or the trans identity, but just like the way that I choose to show up. Like this is me. And I challenge people to ask themselves why you would mask that as harm for our community. Because because I've always felt that way about gay people, straight people, bi people, whatever that is. Even as a child, I do not understand, if I'm not hurting me and I'm not hurting whomever it is that I'm connected with, I don't get the argument that somehow, some way that I'm degrading Blackness by my personal expression. It's just, I can't make that connection.
This conversation is really loaded, and my unevolved response to gays and their role in our community, and what I would say to someone that was anti-gay or resistant to gay or thinks that their message of anti-gayness is some type of thing they're doing to protect or play a part in the rebuilding to Black people is, I think my sisters really did a good job in just saying, what is it in you that's making you deny the humanity of someone that looks like you? What is it inside of you that is making you deny the humanity of someone that looks like you? I appreciate you mentioning religion, because I say this to Christians all the time. Do you truly believe it's wrong to be gay, or do you believe it's wrong to be gay because you read that in Leviticus and because your grandma, if you experience people and you experience gays in the world, you know what I'm saying? There's beliefs that we have. A good point. Some of us, we just don't agree. There's a fine line between not agreeing with people's lifestyles and not understanding people's lifestyles and not realizing.
Oh.
Uh-oh.
I'd like to say one other thing real quickly, because we didn't have the time to talk about this a lot, but religion has a lot to do with our views and perspectives on a lot of this. Because I know as a Buddhist, I used to be Christian, and then I became a Buddhist, Nichiren Daishonin Buddhist, and these issues are not framed the way that they're framed in Christianity. They just are not. And so since you don't have that kind of framing, they almost began to disappear in terms of how you judge them. I'm not saying that we don't see people, but the judgment and how you frame it and your frame of reference is just different.
And Cheryl, thank you, Lisa. Cheryl, did you want to finish up your comment before you?
We just unfortunately, another thing that I want to say to people that are like resistant to acknowledging gays in our community is you have to remember there's some Black people walking around believing that the white man gave us homosexuality. There are Black people walking around believing that Black men are gay because they were sodomized in front of people, right? Black people don't. First, you got to get Black people to just simply believe that God doesn't, you know what I'm saying? The way God feels about our sexuality ain't how we think it is. You know what I'm saying? We have to just embrace gayness as a sexuality. And so what happens, and mind you, it's Black folks that will welcome the pedophiles at church before they welcome the gays, okay? There's Black people that will, when they meet someone that they know molested somebody's child, they will say, I'll pray for him, or just deny the sin. But meet a gay person and they is like, and they, you know what I'm saying? They feel like they can ready to catch a gay demon or something, right? So there is sexuality, and then there's sexual perversion. I talk to my gay friend. I think the gay community within themselves, I think, is still having this conversation of, what things do we consider just to be our sexuality? And our sexuality to the world kind of still seems unique versus what the gays consider to be a harm against another gay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think within that community in itself, y'all are still having conversations what y'all lines of sexuality versus perversion.
Duke?
There's two things I wanted to say. So one is about this topic, and the second is a possible solution to another topic. So I don't know how much time we have, but I do want to make sure.
We have 20 minutes.
All right. So first thing is that when it comes to this topic of homosexuality and transgender, when I look back over the abuse that I received when I was younger, it was from men and women equally, Black men and women equally, as a homosexual male. But I realized that for me, after I did some learning and growing and observing in my community, I don't think I was abused because of my sexuality. I was abused because people were trying to gatekeep masculinity in my community. And that even ties in forth when it comes to the pedophilia argument. We don't have this analysis or lens of trauma around of quote unquote heterosexual pedophilia when it's a man raping a woman, or even a woman raping a little girl. We don't have the same care and lens because there isn't a societal aspect where you are respected as such as a man. Like, we're not interrupting manhood if we rape a woman. We're not interrupting manhood if women sleep with each other. We're not doing the anything that's challenging our narrative in the society in order to get to a respectable place. And so that's something that I think everyone should just look into. Like, we all do this thing of gatekeeping manhood, because even for some of the most evolved women that I know, quote unquote, the moment a Black man like gets his nails done or says he's taking a nap or some other stuff, and this, you see it all online, it's like all of a sudden he gay. Like, anything that is not prescribed to like this archaic, patriarchal, colonized view of what a man should be, we are in care about it. And there's reasons for that. There's clear castration, there's clear removal of Black men from our family community. So there's reasons behind this, but I believe it all ties together again from the interconnected aspect. So my solution thing for something else. When I think about sexual violence in our community, I think one solution, something I've been looking into, is we have to make sure that TV and film is not raising our children. Because I know growing up, there was not a single narrative where a woman's no was respected. No meant try harder. In every cartoon, in every sitcom, in every movie, it just meant it was just like this intermittent thing. But if the man just kept trying, if he just kept being good, he would get the quote unquote prize at the end of the day. And there was no choice for the woman. It was just like, and everyone would talk to the woman too, like, you know, you're going to end up with him. You know, it's going to be this thing. And that became a real narrative, I believe, in our communities. And two is, on the flip side of that, is that, again, with art imitating life, in those same shows, the idea of a man being raped or a victim was not respected. It was not something that people would look into. Like, this was TV shows like Smart Guy with Taj Mahal. This little boy was sexualized damn near every day of his life for being intelligent and cute by older women, and there was no interruption about this particular narrative. Like, this is something that we just absorb day in and day out. How Stella got her groove back with a woman 20 years since, no one was calling Stella a predator. Like, Chris Brown admits a couple of interviews ago that he was raped at 8 years old, and the interviewers, who are also women, are laughing and like, you must be a beast in bed. Like, that sexual violence is a real struggle in our community that is not gender based. It is literally a lack of respect for Black children. And growing up with that as adults, we are seeing those repercussions, but that's something I wanted to offer.
Now, before people respond to that very powerful and very provocative narrative, we are in our final 16 minutes. And one of the things that's very, very important to our dialogue is solutions, giving people gems and considerations to bring into their experience as Black people, so we can unlearn anti-Black toxicity or dysfunctional behaviors that create conflict between us that is not constructive or helpful to us as a people that already live in a minefield. So going forward, and this be as brief as we can so somebody won't get the whole 15 minutes, let's talk in a way that encapsulates solutions to conflict between Black men and women, solutions to the sexualization of Black children that Duke just broke down, solutions to us passively, in some cases, allowing ourselves to be at risk and destroyed, solutions to a narrative called the media that perpetually implies that Black people should not love each other, but should chase white folks. That's what it says, really get mad at me or not. That's what the TV is saying. So those are some of the narratives that are interrupting Black peace, Black safety, and Black unity. What are solutions to those narratives?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Nashara.
So one solution to these narratives is keeping in the front of our conscious. There was our narrative before colonialism. There's this narrative that we're struggling with post-colonialism. And even though we're going back to learning the ways of our ancestors, this new rebirth that we're coming up with doesn't have to exactly mimic that. We have the free reign to make this new narrative whatever we want it to be. And we just have to keep in mind that it is us. Only us can really hold us back in that way, in terms of what we give ourselves permission to lead from. And one more thing I want to say before we go out, we have to make space for anti-Blackness. We have to find a way to better communicate to Black people that we know don't like the fact that they are Black, do not like you know what I'm saying? We all know there's this level of internalized self-hatred that we have, but the way we go about talking about our own internalized self-hatred versus the way we go about talking about someone else's own internalized self-hatred is not the same. I think we do need to make more spaces where Black people struggling with their acceptance of Blackness can fest that and not have to worry about being told they're sellouts, Uncle Ruckuses, Uncle Toms, so forth and so forth.
Thank you, Nashira.
So I am an advocate and champion of dialogue, conversation. I know that through conversation comes healing. So, and I understand that everybody has an access point. So everybody has a place where someone can meet them to help to inject new ideas and thoughts and to get people to challenge the things that they believe and the things that they hold very close to their hearts that are harmful to our community. So my solution is that people who have the information do what they can to find access points for people who they have connection with to help to shift their perspective. And you can do that on social media, especially people who have platforms. You can do it off social media. If it's like if a person's gift is talking to strangers, then have conversations with strangers. But people who are quote unquote in the know have a responsibility to spread the message of anti-Blackness, to educate people about it, and to do it in ways that they don't alienate other people and harm other people, and encourage other people to do it. You know, so once you get this pro-Black gospel, make sure that you go on and meet people at their access points and keep passing it on, because it's like we won't survive if we don't save one another.
I think that we have to come to grips with the fact that we live in such a broken society, an unhealthy, over-sexualized, racist, individualist society. All of these things are harmful to Black people. We are village people. We are people who are used to being with the group, and we need to return to that. And I just want to recommend 2 books because they just give you a whole other way of looking at things. It's amazing. But one of them is called The Spirit of Intimacy. Ancient African Teachings and the Ways of Relationships by Tobumfu Some. And the other one is The Healing Wisdom of Africa. I don't know if you can really see this, but again, finding life purposes through nature, rituals, and community. We have to have a broader vocabulary and a broader perspective of how to look at things and how to relate to each other. And I definitely am a child, a product of the Black liberation struggle. We all need to come together. I would say get involved with the Black liberation struggle, but get involved with your community, the people, the group, the circle. And there are people doing wonderful things. People are starting to have healing circles, which I think is great. And also I'm starting to hear things like decolonize therapy, decolonize it. So those are good things.
Thank you. In those books that you recommended, I know for a fact that they're transformative.
Yes.
They're very helpful. And Duke pushes one of those books a lot that you read from Baladoma Some's wife, former wife, Sombufu Some. So yeah, these are all great advice that you've given, great solution-based things. Solution that I always ask people to consider is stop asking rhetorical questions. Like sometimes when somebody gets on our nerves, they go, "What's wrong with you?" But we don't wait for an answer. It's a rhetorical question. Or earlier, Ellen mentioned something about somebody thinking, well, how you gonna think that homosexuality is connected to pedophilia? Well, ask them that and wait and sit there, relax, chilling and wait for an answer. Because often, one of the reasons I use the term unresolved so much is that we always run around here in half narratives and half the perspective, because we going off on them for having, you stupid mother, and so we don't even get to hear how they came to their conclusion. And we might disagree with them, which is fine, but they, believe it or not, there's something very real that led them to that perspective that you disagree with. It's not completely based on delusion or hallucinatory behavior. It's based on material circumstance that they might be able to break down to you, where you are now able to have a real dialogue that could be helpful to them. For example, I'll be real quick with this. I've met people who feel like, about the pedophilia thing, but they usually in many cases were sexually molested. And their perspective on it being a pedophile issue, because for them it was. They were a child and somebody raped them.
Okay.
Now they're too busy being a man, quote unquote, and trying to make up for any manhood insecurities to tell that story as part of their normal narrative. But trust me, if a brother cannot stop talking about pedophiles and homosexuals, there's usually some real baseline experiential things that need to be unpacked with respect, not with attack.
Right.
For them to go on and have that conversation so they can transform or have some other considerations or whatever. I mean, they might stick with their perspective, but the bottom line is hostility and attack and attitude and necks going and bracing up and judging has no transformative effect.
Right.
And one of the wonderful things that the books that Lisa raised help us talk about is how to build harmony with each other, and what the factors are of building harmonies among African people. And the very powerful passage, there's no I, there's just we.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of languages where we're from, there ain't no such thing as the word I. It's all we. But anyway, don't get me on my little box. Before we close, Duke, do you have any ending solution-based perspective?
Something that I've just been rolling with for a while. I said it yesterday in the live stream, and it deserves to be said again. Do not allow the white community to offer theory or perspective on how to treat other people as human beings, because they have absolutely no credibility.
There you go.
I think that's my favorite thing.
I'm borrowing that line.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
We are people who have been robbed of our humanity, and unfortunately, they are amongst the people that look like the thieves of humanity.
And that's why it's ironic that some of us are conditioned to be white accommodationist.
Yeah.
And many of us are, because we've been so successfully brainwashed, but we're accommodating something that's lesser than us in spirit and humanity.
Yeah.
But we don't know that, but we're going to teach that.
Right.
But anyway, sisters, and my brother Duke, who's the only brother left, except for Nathaniel, who's hidden, and our co-producer, Adam, who's somewhere in the mix. I want to thank you all for coming to the discussion.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, this has been amazing.
There's a lot more that we can discuss and will discuss, because there's more to this than this one-time thing. But I'm very appreciative of you all being here with the discussion. And just to reiterate before we close, what the discussion was geared to be about was Black womanhood, resisting envy, conflict, and murder. And we touched on all of that to some extent. We didn't get enough into the envy, but I will say that a lot of the attack on Black people and on Black women is because of envy, of the power and beauty of African sisters. Yeah. And some people just can't take it. I think of Sandra Bland when she told that white cop, look, he was like, well, we're going to get rid of you because I can't take this.
Right. Right.
So that's
and to think there are people that are like, well, girl, they killing us when we ain't talking back, and you over here talking back. I mean, what you said was true. You were saying the law, but girl, you was talking back. They killing us for being silent and not having them. You over here talking back.
Yeah, well, I think it won't be dangerous to talk back if we are a collective.
That's right.
We listen to what Lisa keeps trying to tell us.
That's
if we're unified, it becomes way more dangerous to mess with us.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway,
that's the reason that they do everything under the sun to keep us separate. Everything.
Right.
Covert, subtle, everything.
Everything.
One last midget.
Yeah,
Nathaniel said something.
Yeah, I was.
Okay.
So I've been, struggling, like, how you said, they wouldn't be able to mess with us so easily if we were united. I was talking to someone this week, and they were talking about how, a lot of the organizations that everybody uses, or stores that, Black people support, or everyday stores that we think are just neutral stores, are stores that are funding the police, like stores like Walmart or Target. We think it's just a store, but these are stores that are funding our own oppression. Mm-hmm. Victoria's Secret, Apple, we all love iPhones, but Apple, kids get killed to mine these minerals that go in these phones. So it's like, how do we stop shopping or supporting these places that fund our oppression? But it's like, also, what's the alternative?
Well, that's a whole other conversation that you bring up at 3 minutes before we end. But it's important. I mean, Facebook is ran by a white supremacist.
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll be here forever. Nobody brought this sleeping bag. So, we get ready to end, y'all. but and she's aiming to say so. What's up, sister?
One last thing. Miss Lisa David, your liberation colors reminded me of some Kwanzaa principles that I think if we keep in mind could be solutions too. Umoja and Kuji Chakalia. We can be united, but we can also define ourselves. We can be united, but we can also be individuals. I think Black people confuse with unity as everyone's thinking the exact same thing, and we all came to the conclusions in the exact same way.
Yeah, and that's not true.
And we do have to keep in mind as a people, we can't be united and acknowledge each other's own individualities.
Yes, we can be unique because we are unique, but we need to not be in conflict with Black people and Blackness.
So maybe that's what the real issue is. We know we got to be united. We just not good at.
Comes in. But we're gonna be here forever with you, Mr.
Permission to be each other.
Anyway, sisters and brothers, thanks again for the dialogue. Thank you for the solutions. This video will last from time immemorial. Thousands ultimately will see it. And your words will last forever. And thank you for bringing those words. I appreciate them. Ashe, love Black people. Love humanity, but especially love Black people.
Yeah, I love Black people.
Yes.
I love us.
It was nice to meet you, ladies, and nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you.
Very nice.